Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to D&I One-on-One, a monthly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, and belongingness. And today's conversation is all about code switching, and I'm so excited because this topic comes up often. So now we're going to get to do a deep dive. My name is Jina Etienne. I am the creator and the host of this series. I'm a certified diversity executive. I'm also a CPA, I should say a recovering CPA. After a 26-year career practicing as a CPA in public accounting, I'm now a consultant, trainer, and speaker. My work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. And some of this be yourself thing, it's directly tied into code switching that we're going to talk about today. Joining me is Masika Mahabir. She is an indomitable force with an illustrious career spanning over a decade in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Drawing from her vast experience across various professional landscapes, Masika brings a unique, trauma-informed approach to addressing cultural complexities with boldness and clarity. As a tenacious CEO and founder of Diversity Nexus, she's a fervent advocate for inclusive practices, using her extensive knowledge and unwavering commitment to create transformative DEI solutions. Her work has not only inspired countless team members, but has also brought innovation to organizations, leaving a lasting positive imprint on the world of diversity and inclusion. And can I say, I can attest to the dynamicity, if that's even a word, to her presentations, truly, truly engaging. So Masika, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Jina, for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much to the CPA Academy for having or hosting this space for us today.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about code switching. And as I was saying at the beginning, this topic comes up a lot. I do think for us to have a meaningful discussion, we start with definitions. So how about we start with code switching itself? How do we define that?
Code switching. Code switching is when people from a marginalized group adjust their language, their behavior, or presentation style to fit the dominant group in different social settings and professional settings. It's often done to align to the dominant culture's expectations, expectations of what is professionalism as well. Code switching, like we have the lovely definition up on the screen as well. Would you like me to read it as well, or because I'm vibing off of what I'm feeling code switching is?
Well, I can read it if you want to just keep going.
Go ahead if you would like to read it, and then I'll add on. That would be cool.
So everybody, we're now reading the act of adjusting language, behavior, or appearance to align with the expectations of a different social or professional environment, often to gain acceptance or avoid negative judgments.
So what I like to focus on especially is like the fact that code switching is a concealment in response to the pressures of the dominant culture. It's a form of oppression. It's commonly known as a form of oppression, but I'm really excited to get deeper into this conversation where we can talk more about how it can actually be used as a tool. But before we can even get into that part of the conversation, it's so important to understand the foundations of what code switching is, where it appears, and who is impacted by it.
Well, I think I want to jump in because I want to speak on behalf of some people who might scratch their heads a little bit about what you just said. Only from the perspective of code switching can sometimes sound like it's a negative thing. And it's not necessarily negative. I also know that the meaning of words change over time. New words are added to the dictionary. Additional definitions are added for clarity or changed. Other words sort of disappear from our language. And so how has that happened with code switching? Because I feel it's a little bit different. I'll stop there. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, exactly. And we're going to get into that. So because I think what you're talking about there is that semantic shift, like the how words could mean a certain thing, and with time or evolve. Actually, that's exactly it. Language is always evolving.
Yeah.
That's right. So there's many actually there's one solid definition for code switching, which is what I think we have on the screen right here, like changing your speech, dress, or behavior to fit in, adapting to different cultural or professional settings. Again, like I mentioned, often driven by social approval or professional success. It can feel like, and that's what I was about to get into, it can feel like a balancing act. It's a source of emotional exhaustion for some. And it's, again, like often in response to some sort of feeling of insecurity or some sort of situation where somebody might not feel safe to share that part of their identity. Concealment.
I know what I was thinking now because of what you said. It is that pressure or that fear, that anxiety. It's often unspoken. It's often invisible. Sometimes it's unconscious because we are almost naturally, as humans, driven to conform. As a collective, from an evolutionary perspective, we survived because we stayed in groups.
Correct.
And to be in a group, you needed to be part of the group. To be part of the group, you needed to be like those others in the group. And so we naturally cluster. That cluster tendency means we change and adapt to fit in the group. But what happens when you're the only?
Oh,
it's a little awkward. But first, hold on. Wait. There's so much vernacular here. So I want to go through from the top. Let's just walk through these definitions. And let's move on to agency. And Michelle, I see your question. Beautiful question. I want to hold it until we get through the definitions. Is that cool? All right. So what's our next slide?
But wait, before we get to agency, I don't know if I can talk on that about being the only. Will we talk about being the only in a bit?
Yes, we can talk about them. I just want to throw the language out there. Let's get the language done.
Go for it.
All right. So we have code switching. Next is agency. What is agency? And I see it as power. A lot of people say owning your power, but this is really about having the confidence to make decisions on your own behalf, be your own advocate, and set some boundaries around how people can behave around you, what you are expecting to happen. And you can make decisions about the course that you're going to take. So at work, agency could be about deciding what your schedule is going to be, or it can be about the role you're going to be playing in this meeting. That somebody's asking you to do something and you're like, no, that's actually not my job description. That's not my responsibility. So agency is really about having that control. That's a broad definition. Anything to add?
It's empowerment of choice. Agency is having, again, that safety, the confidence to know that you can make this decision without a fear of retribution.
Yeah. That's a really great addition. Thank you. And then the next definition is assimilation. Ooh, this one's sticky. I just want to put the definition out there and then we can come back to all of those nuances. So would you like to define it or you want me to read this definition?
I would be happy to read it. What is assimilation? Assimilation is the process by which individuals or groups adopt the customs, behaviors, and norms of the dominant culture. There's that dominant culture I was mentioning earlier, often at the expense of the person's own identity in order to fit in to be accepted. Again, that's security and safety.
Yeah.
It's, again, by adopting language, dress, and mannerisms of the dominant group, downplaying or hiding personal or cultural differences, feeling that pressure to conform to societal or professional expectations, the loss of your identity, your authenticity, your traditions, or the way you your self-expression over time. And it's also often linked to power dynamics in society or organizations, power systems.
Power systems, yeah. And so when you and I started talking about this subject and got really excited about doing this webinar, we were exploring the different sides of code switching, which is how we came up with agency or assimilation. And for many, this can sound confusing because, excuse me, if agency is empowerment, and I'm going to reduce assimilation into trying to becoming invisible or merging in and losing yourself, how on earth can code switching be a little bit of both?
How can it be a little bit of both?
So in other words, how can code switching be a form of agency?
And at the same time,
Or perhaps not necessarily at the same time. Let's start from one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
How can code switching be agency?
Agency. Well, again, okay, how can it be for agency? So it's when you have choice, that's when it can be for agency. So like I like to start talking about it first as a form of oppression because because commonly it's known as a form of oppression, or commonly it's viewed in a negative light.
Yes.
And the reason that it is commonly viewed in a negative light, to assimilate or have to hide parts of your identity, is because having to hide parts of your identity is emotionally exhausting. I honestly, for the most part, feel like it is a horrible form of oppression. But again, when you apply choice, consent, like anything else in life, without consent, things are oppressive or harmful. But when you have consent, that's when things are in a good space, in a healthy space, and in an empowered space. So again, but if you have the choice, you can then feel good about the who you are and the decisions you're making. Can I give you an example of a time that I was actually able to use parts of my identity that in the past I really had to hide? My background is Trinidadian. My parents are Trinidadian. Our household is West Indian. We eat curry so much. I have curry chicken in my kitchen right now. That's not every day, but just so happens to be today. But curry chicken in the office was a no-no. People used to glare or make comments or say things about my cultural food when I would bring it to the office and put it in the microwave, warm up my delicious curry. Can you believe it? I know now it's better, it's more accepted, but this wasn't the case like 10, 15 years ago. It was definitely a different climate. But what happened was I was in a situation where I knew that the CEO of the organization that I was at was a big curry chicken fan. He was a huge roti fan. And I just so happened to be a roti connoisseur. So I took this opportunity to combine an event where we had to bring in food, and I organized a food truck, a curry chicken food truck.
So you brought your identity into and I was going to say unmasked, but we have masking coming up in a little bit as a conversation. But you just open it up like that.
Yes. And there were people who had questions, people who were like, ooh, that's ethnic food. There was fried chicken as well.
Ethnic food, but okay.
But in other words, there was a variety. There was a variety on the menu, but I took that as an opportunity to use something that is authentic, genuinely authentic to me. When I tell you I'm a roti connoisseur, I'm not joking. Like I'm trying to keep it professional.
I was about to say, let's stop talking about food because I didn't really have a lunch. So thank you for that. I'm going to bring us back to the conversation.
This was an opportunity for me to connect to somebody who was in a position of power, somebody from that dominant culture, someone who is attached to those systems of power, who that I can genuinely bond with. Not pretend, not fake. This is truly a genuine bonding moment. And this is an opportunity to then make connections of understanding with one another.
Yeah.
And when we build these connections of understanding with one another, what does that do? It develops trust. And what does amazing, innovative teams need to be excellent? A trusting, safe environment. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's one way.
Well, I think, and one of the things that's interesting, let me come back to the definition here, because it says appearance to align with the expectations of a different social or professional environment. I can tell you from my experience that comes to mind is just my hair. So for years, I want to say starting in 7th or 8th grade, I got a relaxer. First one I ever got. And as a result of that, I wore my hair relaxed, meaning, straight, for up until 2 years ago. Up until last summer, actually. Last summer, I decided to go natural. And so for those listening that might not know what I'm talking about, it means I have no product in my hair to make it look different than it naturally is, other than styling products, that kind of thing.
You have no chemical in your hair to take the curl and kink out of your naturally textured hair.
Thank you. That is correct. But I will say that that has not been the norm. And for many African American or Black women in this country, there has been this expectation that hairstyles, to be professional, have to look a particular way, which is rooted and anchored in a white Anglo-Saxon style. And so I have started to slowly change my hair and have been painfully self-conscious about it, because I feel like I am absolutely going against the norm. And I will say the first couple of times that I wore my hair out, I felt conspicuous. I wasn't even listening to some of those meetings. I was so busy in those meetings trying to pay attention to see if people were judging me. And that gets to the emotional tax that you end up paying. That's just a little teeny example, but it is something that in this case, it's not me connecting to a person of power like you're talking about. For me, it's seeking acceptance across my profession, just from colleagues day to day. And it's a form of agency because I decided to change my hair. But it's actually breaking out of this assimilation where I'm trying to blend in and hide, hiding in plain sight, so to speak. Maybe that's one way to look at it. You're looking at some of the questions. So I'm curious if there's something that, Tanya loves curry, just for the record. I think you might be making some other people hungry from what I'm seeing in the comments. I do want to go back to the first question from Michelle. I don't know if you can see that one, but I want to bring this back.
I did not see it, but
why doesn't the definition mention marginalized community or majority community?
Yeah, because there's flexibility in that definition, and also the definition shifts depending on the context. Yes. So because code switching can. I personally believe that the definition should incorporate the word marginalization. That's why when I started talking, I included the word marginalization. Can you think of a situation or a circumstance, Jina, where there isn't marginalization involved with code switching? Can you?
It's funny you ask, because I think I can think of a situation that doesn't involve race per se.
Like, for example, can white people code switch as well?
Well, but where I was going with that is, okay, I can see a white woman,
okay,
code switching. She is a member of a group that isn't necessarily marginalized in the traditional sense, but white women in corporate America historically don't set the archetype for successful, bold, strong, effective, smart leader. So what does she then have to do day to day to quote unquote fit in? Does she have to make changes to her style? Does she talk about different things? One of the examples that I often give in my training is, imagine a white woman in a predominantly white organization goes to happy hour with her colleagues, finds herself chit-chatting with some of her male colleagues. And what does she talk about? Basketball. She talks about golf, and she might like basketball. But what she doesn't talk about maybe are her children. Maybe she doesn't talk about some of the music that she listens to because she wants to fit in. And so her choice to talk about things differently or to talk in completely different ways is a form of code switching. Now, as a Black woman, I would be maybe doing those same things, but for very different reasons.
Correct. Which is what I was about to say. There's still a marginalization there in that scenario, because the marginalization identity is gender in that scenario. So that's a woman in a male dominant space. So that's why I'm still thinking that definition still would require the word marginalization in it. If I think it was Michelle who was Michelle. So I would agree with Michelle by saying that I would include the word marginalization in the terms of the definition. Now, where I was thinking that there might not, where a scenario where it might not be marginalization in the act of code switching, because I remember actually having this conversation with white men in another group at another time. And they were like, yeah, I have to code switch all the time. I can't come into work and start, I can't think of their local culture, like colloquialisms, sorry. Like, let's say I can't go into work and start talking to my boss about the barbecue I had over the weekend. I need to be professional. I need to show up a certain way, which is a form of code switching. But the difference between the harm that comes from the code switching is whether you're part of that dominant group, if you're attached to that system of power that we were discussing earlier. If you are part of that group, because you were talking about, what you said earlier about people coming together and clustering, when you are part of that group, there are certain levels of protection afforded to you for being part of that group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the only scenario I can come up with where marginalization wouldn't be involved. You can still code switch, but you're not facing the same retribution and harms that other people who are marginalized face.
So I think where some of this gets confusing then is the general definition of code switching that you often hear. If you just start Googling what is code switching and pull up a bunch of articles, first of all, you'll get a lot of different things. But oftentimes, what I've seen more today is it's generalized. So it's generalized in that it's just changing to adapt to your situation. And then the language around marginalized communities, I also see it, for me, it's minorities in a particular context. So you're the only fill in the blank in the room. And so you adapt. And so, yes, that's a form of code switching. For example, you're the only guy at the bridal shower, right? You're going to naturally behave a little differently. But that's because we're going to adapt to our social settings. I am not wearing a ball gown to happy hour, right? Sure. So some of this is natural and it's intuitive. And of course, because if you didn't, people would look at you funny. But then to your point, sometimes for purposes of protection, because of power dynamics, because of organizational politics, because of social pressures, because of not unconscious, but very overt biases,
sometimes
many of us find that we are trying to do all kinds of things to stay as far away from that stereotype as possible. And so those behaviors that we change fall under the category of code switching.
Absolutely.
Now, I do want to move into some of the conversation specifically around assimilation, because I think assimilation, I don't know that we hear a lot of talking about that. And there's so much involved in assimilation, because for me, and when I first started researching this word, this was several years ago, so much of the definition focused on the assimilation of minorities and I mean racial and ethnic minorities into a white majority culture, so that those minorities, those races and ethnicities, slowly were merged into and no longer distinctly noticeable in the society. And so it had very negative connotations. It's like we're trying to erase a culture, we're trying to erase an ethnicity, etc. So from that root, we come to where we are today, which is individuals or groups adopting customs, behaviors, and norms of the dominant culture to fit in. How does this show up then day to day at work? Can you provide some examples? And is this also something that's only, I'm now pre-asking a question, only because you're a member of a marginalized group that you assimilate or adopt assimilation strategies?
Wait. What was that last part about only being?
Or is it only because you're a member of a marginalized group that you adopt assimilation strategies? So can a white woman struggle with assimilation?
Absolutely.
So that's where I was going. That's where I was going. That was the hard way of asking. Let me just go to the bottom line as an example. The same example that we were talking about with code switching, but now with assimilation.
Absolutely. Again, because can a white woman? So just white women, like there's still a marginalization there of gender. So if we were, let me try and help the scenario. Like if it was a white cis heterosexual man,
It's cisgender, just for those.
cisgender heterosexual man of in middle class. All right, and what's this scenario? How does assimilation?
What might assimilation look like? Yeah.
What
could he be in a situation where he feels this pressure to assimilate?
Oh, absolutely. So, so I have put on several cultural events throughout my life. One of which through my childhood would be like Caravana or like the Caribbean festivals. Mm-hmm. And at Caribbean festivals, we have Caribbean music, we have Caribbean food, we've got Caribbean dancers, we've got storytellers, folk tale tellers. And of course, holding these type of events in North America, where, you know, we are not the Caribbean people are not the dominant group. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of white people at our events as well, or some, there's going to be some. And, Uncle Frank, that was my white uncle, he would definitely act in certain ways, speak in certain ways, drink certain drinks to fit and assimilate. I would say fit. I don't feel like assimilate would apply to him. He would behave and act a certain way to fit in with the Caribbean culture. I ran into him just coincidentally in life, in my older years at a bar where he was at a business meeting. He was acting completely different when he was surrounded by his counterparts, his peers, his white male peers. He was definitely not Uncle Frank. He was Frank, what's his face last name, businessman, with these men. And I definitely noticed the difference there. So I don't know if I would want to use the term assimilate.
Right.
Because that I would say more that's fitting in. Yes. I feel like the term assimilate is connected to oppression.
Yes, that's right. And that's the important distinction, because you say, and you asked earlier, can a white person code switch? Yes. But does a white person feel pressures to assimilate? And oh my, if we want to start having some really deep conversations, y'all, we probably should set up another time when we have like a coffee shop, like get together and chat, because just this stuff is complex and it's pretty straightforward on the one hand and highly nuanced on the other. And so we can't even give this thing the proper justice, but what in an hour, but really, I think having a conversation to open up some awareness around the fact that it's not as simple as changing your hair, changing the way you talk, and that kind of thing. Now, because of what you just said, I put the slide up on the screen. Like, is it the difference between fitting in and blending in? And I think what is his uncle something, whatever his last name is? I don't remember what you said to him. Uncle Frank, whatever his last name is. For him, it was fitting in, not blending in. Would you say that's the example that you gave?
Definitely fitting in. He was still he was still very proud of his identity outside of this Caribbean culture.
So in a made up example, then, what would he do that would fall under the blending in category instead of the fitting in category? I know I'm putting you on spot, so if you can't think of something, let's make up
I
another
can
one.
answer that one.
Okay.
I think adapting, because, and I didn't think I was going to be reflecting on my Uncle Frank today, just so you know. But it does apply, because I know the difference, and I never thought about this till right this second in my entire life. Uncle Frank, although he was my uncle by marriage, and he was definitely part of our family functions and parties, because this was in Alberta. I don't live there anymore. It's a different situation. But I also, in reflection, I definitely see how he still held on to his dominant privilege, his access to power. And he isn't very quick to give that power up. So I think,
None of us are.
agreed. I think now, in reflection, based on what's up on this screen right now, I think my Uncle Frank has just been fitting in and not blending in, because I think adapting would be distance. Well, hang on a second. Did we read the definition?
No, these are just two quotes that I found that tried to clarify the difference between the two.
Adapting, how you present yourself to distance yourself from the cultural or racial stereotype. So adapting is distancing yourself from it.
So adapting is blending in. It's like how you present yourself so that you
present yourself.
So, okay, my brain is thinking about this in a picture, so I'm trying to convert the picture into words. So blending in is making all of the changes that you can so that the stereotypes associated with different dimensions of your identity slowly disappear. So that's where you're distancing yourself from.
Yeah.
I can move as far away from the stereotype of being that Black woman. I can move as far away from the stereotype of being somebody with a disability. It's a visible disability. And by making those changes and distancing myself from those stereotypes, I can, in my mind, blend in.
Okay.
So now fitting in, if I can jump in, sorry, real quick. The other thing about fitting in for many to think about is, in a space where there's that trust and where there's that bravery, I don't feel the same pressures to make those changes if my colleagues allow me to just be part of the group and I can fit in as I am. That doesn't mean, though, I might not be making some changes, because many of us, when we make changes, some of the motivation behind those changes is so that the other people in the room are comfortable with me. And then sometimes I'm making those changes so that I'm comfortable in the room. I'm not worried about their comfort so much as I'm worried about it from my own perspective. And so that's a psychological difference, because I am wanting to stay emotionally safe, psychologically safe, and I'm making these changes to do that.
So to clarify then, my Uncle Frank was fitting in, and the reason he was able to fit in instead of having to blend in is because we made space for him to fit in.
Yes, making space. Wow, I could have just said that. Making space. All right, now, there are so many wonderful questions.
Yes. I kind of want to say something about the questions in the Q&A.
Yes,
or in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of things that I can't focus on because I'm focusing on us. But like you said, I'm seeing so many interesting conversations that we could have forever. There's so many avenues. Where are you looking at now there, Jina?
Oh, so I moved my mouse. There was one way earlier. Let me find it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I wish the Q&A were bigger. All right, I can't find it, but there was one, and I thought it was a really, I want to say poignant, but different example. Let's say a woman has a double mastectomy, and now she's wearing, let's say, prosthetics and a bra. Does that fall into this conversation of code switching, assimilation, fitting in? And how does it tie in? Because there's so many different, and the reason I wanted to bring that in is one of the complexities around the topic of code switching is once you start talking about people making changes to themselves to be part of a bigger group, it without the language of marginalization, without the language of being associated with a minority group, member of a minority group, it just eliminates the need for the term. Do we need to have a term like code switching if it's the natural tendency for us to change to be part of a group? And so does that example, a woman with a mastectomy, changing her appearance, fall into this category?
I think it absolutely does. And again, the need for the term code switching is because of its tie to oppression. Code switching alone, the act, again, it's a normal human behavior to align yourself with the group for safety. It's in our DNA. But the reason that we have evolved into the humans that we are to have deeper understanding of our world, we understand that code switching is beyond just changing your behavior to go along with the group for group safety. This is an actual action that's causing harm to you, where, aligning with the group, that's a form of protection. Code switching is a type of harm. It's a type of emotional exhaustion. But I think to the scenario that you're talking there about the double mastectomy and changing your appearance to fit in with the group, I want to say that more aligns to masking, just simply because of its tangential relation to the medical situation of things, masking. So whereas I feel like code switching is more of adapting a behavior, masking is more of an action that conceals who you are inherently.
Actively concealing something. So I put masking here on the screen, but before we do that, I'm going to jump back just a couple slides and put up here assimilation strategies, because some of what we've been talking about, and folks, I invite you to, if you haven't downloaded the slides, please do. We have a lot of language and terminology here. But there are a lot of different strategies that we employ or deploy in order to do the fitting in, blending in, hiding, trying to be as invisible, as inconspicuous as possible when it comes to the things that make us different. I wanted to put that up there so now we can look at masking as a definition, because it's not on the assimilation strategies slide. So would you like me to read the definition? Would you like to? Okay. Masking is the process by which individuals conceal or suppress core behaviors, traits, or expressions to avoid judgment or stigma, often to appear more socially acceptable or to fit into societal expectations. So this is hiding those things that we are worried about will stand out as abnormal or different from the group. Suppressing natural communication styles or mannerisms. So this falls under the same category. Code switching is that umbrella. These are some of the different strategies now that we're going to start to employ in order, when we say code switching and you say, well, changing manner of dress or whatnot, digging down, a couple levels deeper, you get to these kinds of definitions and start to see some of the behaviors that we're doing.
Suppressing natural communication styles and mannerisms, stimming. That's one way. That's one.
Oh, okay.
That's one characteristic people mask. Stimming.
Yeah. And then we have, what else is on here? Motivated by fear, rejection, negative stereotyping can lead to emotional exhaustion. There's a wonderful article, and now that you brought it up at the beginning, and now I'm wishing I had pulled it out so I could share the link. And it's talking about the emotional tax. And why is there an emotional tax when you have to do this over and over again? Well, so I'll jump in really quickly on this, and then I'll ask for your thoughts. When you are pulling from any combination of these strategies, consciously or subconsciously, they are drawing on your energy. I like to imagine, let's say we all wake up in the morning and we all start with 100 energy units. And as we go through the day, we have to use them up. So you're going to use some of those energy units to do a Zoom. You're going to be on some of those energy units to make your cup of coffee or tea in the morning. And by the end of the day, you've run out of energy units. And what I would say for those who find themselves with this pressure to make these changes, to assimilate, to fit in, even if it's from a source of agency, even if it's a source of power, empowerment, you're still draining, you're taking energy units to put some effort into how you are showing up. I don't have as many energy units to put into that Excel spreadsheet.
Absolutely. Like just today, this morning, last night in preparation for today's webinar, I wanted to review my notes. I wanted to review the slides, but you know what I was doing? I was taking time to make sure my hair looked, the curls were right and presentable for what the dominant culture's perception of what is acceptable and professional.
Yeah.
That is energy taken from me to code switch or assimilate for today's meeting.
Absolutely. I do that before I speak now all the time. I have that same anxiety. And it's interesting because I've been speaking for a very long time, and there isn't a lot that rattles me, that gets me nervous. I mean, I used to joke and say, you need a speaker, call me up, give me 5 minutes and tell me what you want to talk about. And I can go out there to, like, if somebody, they didn't have a speaker and they just needed somebody to fill in, I'm like, I got you.
Yeah.
But the thing that would slow me down and still slows me down today is, like you said, the hair. The hair has changed everything. And so I'm so happy that you shared that example, because it doesn't have to be a big thing. And it can only be one thing that's causing the pressure, that's causing the strain, that's causing the anxiety. But it's different levels for each of us. Some people, it doesn't bother them at all.
But it's also not just that. It's not just my hair. It's also, the socioeconomic pressures and stress. It's, why does my vacuum cleaner cost $500 now? It's these world stresses of life that impact all of us. And then we have our marginalized groups that have the additional stress on top of it. So the world is already stressful enough. And then we have these additional stresses on it. When you were talking about, with your scenario about the energy and what you have to do to code switch for safety, it was making me think of The Walking Dead and zombies.
Wow. Okay.
Are you familiar?
I am, but we're going to The Walking Dead.
But hear me out. So we all know in The Walking Dead and the zombie world, the only way to get around zombies is to either unalive them, get rid of them, or put zombie goo on yourself so you can assimilate and be hidden. And
hiding in plain sight. Yes.
Hiding in plain sight. Yeah. And it made me think of all the scenes where the humans that are left are trying to travel through the zombies, and they're so tense, traveling because they've got the zombie goo on them to code switch or hide. Zombie goo. I want to say zombie
goo. I'm sorry. We should have thought about this in advance and put it on the slide, a picture of a zombie.
Academy first. Talking about zombie goo.
I do think that it's a very good visual, because I think, and one of the things I always like to say is that for many of us, when you talk about this intellectually, it's one thing. But I love the example you just gave, because for most people, I don't want to say everybody, for many people, we can start to understand what that anxiety and fear might feel like. I may have never experienced the anxiety that you're experiencing, but now that you've shared a story with me that helps me understand the feeling, the impact. Oh, now I really understand what you're saying, right? And that's the difference, by the way, between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is, wow, I really feel sorry for you. But empathy is like what you just said with the zombie goo. Like, oh, wow, I really, the terror that must bring. I know what terror feels like to me. And so I can only feel deeply for you if you're struggling with that same terror. And, hopefully what maybe some people might think after this webinar is that I might not know all the answers. I might still not completely understand code switching, but what I'm starting to understand is that there is a tax or a toll that we pay when we find ourselves having to code switch. And whether it's conscious or subconscious, because we naturally will do some of these tendencies to stay safe. And people of color, people from marginalized communities have been doing this since birth. And because you walk the world with this conspicuous awareness of your difference, always. And so you walk into every room with that, sometimes top of mind, but otherwise it's just learned behavior.
We've spent a lot of this time looking at code switching through the lens of race, a little bit through gender, but I'd like to share another example through,
Yes.
you know, queerness, through LGBTQ lens. So on the series Travelers by FX, it's about two, I forget the actors' names, but oh my goodness, are they ever so cute? About two white gay men in American government during the McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both in government, like they serve under McCarthy, and they're gay, and so they need to hide their queerness. And so the whole series is really a whole series just about code switching. It shows them code switching in their day 9 to 5, and then it shows their life after 5 to whatever work hour, right? And so that's what the whole series is. It's called Travelers, and the idea is that these two men are traveling this path of homophobia and what is it? Threats to the LGBTQ community during their time and what they had to do to survive. So code switching, again, when it is also tied to other marginalized groups.
Yes.
We mentioned race, we mentioned gender. It's also LGBTQ groups, also religious groups,
yes,
faith groups. Religion is so overlooked so often, right? So religion is overlooked. When we talk about diversity topics, we tend to talk about race, gender, sexuality,
disability,
age. Yes, age, and it doesn't even make the top 5. Religion and faith doesn't even make the top 5. So that's another big area, like during Ramadan, and we tend to have conversations, or I hope we're having the conversations surrounding Ramadan and what we can do to minimize the mental energy expense for our Muslim colleagues and friends around Ramadan time as well.
Thank you so much for bringing that in, because oftentimes we lean into race and gender because they're the ones that people are most familiar with. But so I'm so happy that you brought that up and reminded us and reminded me that we need to think more broadly. And I think the religion one is particularly important because for some people, it's as simple as hiding their necklace so that you can't see the jewelry that they're wearing. For many people in different religions, and not necessarily religion, it could be ethnic and ethnicity and culture, they're not going to take off their hijab. But that you're wearing a hijab doesn't necessarily mean you're Muslim. But we make assumptions about that. And so it's really interesting to me that it's easy for us to forget these other groups, even people with disabilities, if it's not a visible disability. And 70% of all disabilities are invisible.
Yeah.
Then there is a disproportionate amount of effort some might go through so that you don't know they have a disability. They're constantly having to make changes and adaptations so that they remain invisible, if you will. Okay,
I know. I was
having a thought. I don't know if you're
age. When you mentioned age, so I don't have cool gray stripes in my hair, but I am old enough to have those cool gray stripes in my hair. But honestly, I'm older, and a lot of people code me as younger, and so I recognize that, and so I have actually made an effort to stay in touch with younger generations to understand what's going on there, because I did I did experience ageism over the years. Oh my goodness. One time with a group of people in the office, this was back in 2018, and a gentleman came in for an interview, and he was in like this very 1980s looking type of suit, but this was 2018. And so the people with me, they were like laughing and making jokes and saying these, look at this old guy. I'm probably the same age as that guy, without them realizing age. And so ageism, it's these different types of marginalized identities.
Yes.
There's so many different types, and there's so many of these different identities across our demographic in this room right now.
And it's interesting because we are in two different countries. So for the record, you are not in the United States, and
I'm code switching. I am a code switching Canadian.
No. But I'm saying that because there are even subtle differences that I know for you and I in some of our meetings and conversations, just in terms of linguistics. But okay, I'm looking at the clock. We probably have about 3 or 4 minutes. Can I ask you to quickly walk through this for folks, just so that when they have a chance to reflect back on the handout?
I've got something. I'm just going to run down. I wrote it down in my list. So I'm going to just, for time, read my list. So before we get into the action plan, keep the action plan up. So how does, what do we do now? How can organizations create environments that allow this safety that we're talking about, the psychological safety and agency, the choice in code switching? So number one, it's about creating conditions where people feel empowered to code switch and create environments of choice. Creating that environment of choice, celebrating diversity, language, attire, and cultural practices. When you celebrate, have cultural events. So book Diversity Nexus, that's me, cultural events. Book me for Black History Month, for Ramadan, for Diwali that's coming up actually next week. It's kind of short notice, but when you host these type of cultural events within your organization, it begins to normalize these different, it brings awareness and light and normalizes these characteristics. Yes?
I just want to clarify for folks, because when you invite in Masika, you're not inviting in a presentation. And so that's the part when you're talking about an event, it's learning, but it's an interactive and organic program, as opposed to, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a training and I'm going to teach you all these things that you need to know.
No,
so I just wanted to throw that in there. All right, now you got 2 more minutes.
Okay, when you're hiring Diversity Nexus, you're hiring an experience of understanding, an experience and an awareness of understanding. So normalize conversations by, even if you don't hire Diversity Nexus, have these events. Encourage diverse expressions of identity. I mentioned stimming earlier. Bake it into your policy that permits stimming in meetings. Create a policy or a procedure on how to handle stimming in meetings. And again, like I said, hire Diversity Nexus. And to help yourself, to help create that mindset of inclusion, these equity prompts, Diversity Nexus came up with this, create a safety action plan. Number one, include from the margins. So again, think about when you're looking at events, policies, procedures, programs, anything that you're looking to create, even a meeting, think about who it was created for, developed by, with and without. Like, who are you leaving out? I could talk about a story about how I was left out of a meeting because I wasn't included. I was on the margin. Number two, fair evaluations and outcomes. Ask yourself, how can this be efficiently and effectively used to transform? How can this effectively and efficiently transform to reduce bias and discrimination? How can your actions effectively and efficiently transform bias and discrimination? Number three, flexibility in arrangements. Oh my goodness, I'm going to say it, work from home. We're having the option, flexibility in arrangements. There could be so many different ways to offer that, but ask yourself, what opportunities do I have that can offer to create greater equity and equality? Number four, transparency. Your actions. Was this designed with equity in mind? And lastly, measurement for fairness. Who benefits from this? Who is disadvantaged from your decision, action, whatever you're coming up with?
Well, thank you for walking us through that, because I know it was there and we didn't have a lot of time. We didn't even jump there, but it's
the survey.
We have a minute left. Gabe, if you haven't already, could you share that link? Just because Masika has a survey that you'd like to get some feedback on. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if you all would be so kind to click on that link, we would both love that. Thank you for joining me today. It is really difficult to have these conversations in an hour, but the whole point of this series is to have these conversations, for people to be there with us in real time. These aren't scripted, so we don't always hit the nail right on the head, but we hope we hit some of the points that you were curious about. But if not, you're welcome to reach out to us. All of our contact information is there. And I see you going like this. You get the last word.
Which is, there were so many amazing questions in the Q&A. And if you ever want to reach out to me and connect with me to have conversations and continue the conversation, you know where to find me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. This has been, as I knew it would be, a great conversation.
Jina, thank you so much. CPA Academy, thank you so much for having me.